Before I introduce my guest, I recently had a conversation with a friend, and this friend was very angry and hurt and upset because of some very sinful lifestyle her son was getting into. And she said to me, "My son's going to hell. He's completely lost." And as a mother was crying out. And I said to her, "Ooh, let's not speak that into reality." She wasn't quite sure that you should do that because she's worked in different areas of life, retreats where venting is good, and wasn't so sure that that was a negative thing to say. So I called my good friend Dan Schneider, Dr. Dan Schneider, to run the conversation past him. And I was quite surprised with what I heard, and it was a very engaging phone call. So I asked him, as always, if he would come on today and help understand it, because we do not want to let Satan into our lives through the things that we say or the things that we think. So Dr. Dan Schneider, who many of you know because you post in the comments, you love when he's on, is he's got his PhD in biblical studies. So it's theology, and he's an adjunct professor of theology at Franciscan University in Steubenville. And then, of course, the most favorite role that all of us remember him for is he's also an assistant to Father Chad Ripperger, who's a renowned exorcist in America, and he is one of the helpers at the Liber Christo Institute and wrote the book, The Liber Christo Method, of which I have talked about. And there is a link in this podcast if you want to buy that, because after the show, who knows, maybe we'll get to that a little bit. So I think I did better this time, Dr. Dan Schneider. How did I do at my intro? Did I blow it at all?
You did well. Thank you. Yes, you covered all the basics. And in theology, you applied what we would call brevior melior. Less is better. So
I like it.
the brevity of the saints, that's what we strive for.
Yeah, just shut up and get to heaven.
Just shut up, do the work, and get to heaven. That's the goal.
So let's talk about this. I think our viewers want to know because, all right, I am just a woman. I'm a friend, but I'm also a spiritual director. So I have a lot, well, and then I have my standards group. So I have a lot of people that call me. In my standards group, I often say to them, look, in this group, you can vent your angry, hurt feelings. My spouse just left me. I just found out my spouse is with another woman. I just found out my husband and my wife and the man are going to have a child, blah, blah, blah. And so we say in this group, in this circle, say that, and then we're going to guide you towards keeping your eyes fixed on God, expressing, saying, man, that stinks. We get it. We've been there. Go on. And then with friends who call, I have many that say, I just want to come to you because I want to get the spiritual perspective. So we do that all the time, but even in my own difficulties, Dan, in life, when I just get so upset or angry, at my husband or life, or just need to express myself, I will go to the woman who I see as, or definitely my spiritual director himself. I have an official spiritual director, but like a friend who's about my age, who's focused on God, but people do this. We talk. Rachel's Vineyard. I think about my friend Christine Watkins, who was working at Rachel's Vineyards. And one of the things that they do in this tried and true method is writing these letters of anger at the person who offended you and just letting it come out. And if there's profane words, let them come out of you. It's kind of like this vomiting out stuff. And then, of course, later in the retreat, they write a letter of forgiveness and so on and so forth. Where do we go wrong and where do we go right? Because you and I in our phone conversation was like, if you put these words out there, somehow Satan can get a grip on them and I'm going to mess that up. So can you break that down for us?
Well, you got to understand that I'm coming from a different perspective, a different modality, if you will. We encourage at the beginning, we're talking about dealing with people with cases of diabolic affliction. So my experience is from that perspective, I'm just Our Lady has repurposed me. I was just a cavalry scout in the military, and now I'm basically doing Cav Scout work for the mystical body, if you will, for the church militant.
What did you call that? Cat Scout?
Cavalry, a Cav Scout. So I was in the U.S. Cavalry. Yeah, I was a Cav Scout. I was in the Army. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was in the Army.
But then you said our mothers repurposed you into doing.
and place me as a Cab Scout in the mystical body of
Got it.
the
Got it.
church,
Okay.
yeah, the church militant. So, and so, we work with cases of diabolic affliction. One of the things that we narrow in on is what attracts the demon to us. And so part of our modality is, as you work through the 4 phases of the protocol, the first phase is a prayer regimen that which would actually be good for Lent if you're going to look for something to do for Lent. We have it in the App Store and on our Libre Christo webpage. It's just a prayer discipline of set times of prayer and a withdrawing from the social media, which is one of the hardest things that people find is the withdrawal from social media. I just got some statistics from a priest, some Pew Research, I believe it was, on social media usage among young people, and it's astounding how much social media that they're using, hours and hours every day. The average is something like 10 hours, some crazy amount. So the input going into the brain is reordering our brain, so to speak. And so one of the things that we do is we pull back to limit what triggers the enemy might be using against the individual. What's triggering him and drawing him into high emotionalities of some kind, whether it's shame or guilt or anger or fear. And so by pulling back and reducing the amount of psychological triggers, and forcing that, number one, it pulls back and helps to delimit that or and minimize it. But also we introduce at that time a limit on what people can pray during that first 30 days, and we limit it to the daily mass reading. So we force you to pull your mind away from the world and then begin to focus your attention on the daily scripture readings. One, it clues you into the liturgical office, the liturgical calendar of the church,
Right.
and also begins to help focus the mind. At the beginning, most people can't do meditation or a mental prayer or Lectio Divina. So it helps focus the mind on scriptures. And so to reorient the thought process and the imagination. Because if you look at, well, I'll get into that in a second. So it's based upon the St. Thomas understanding the human person. So, going back to the original question, we'll get into St. Thomas next, but why this is significant. So we encourage in our particular, what we do is to not tell the story. We find that, people come to us and they just want to go, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Okay. And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. I had a 84-year-old woman who didn't need us, but was sent to us and said, when I was 15, a priest yelled at me in the confessional. I was 14 years old or 15 years old. And I was so hurt. Then I went into religious life and then I left. And here she is in her 80s, still complaining about the priest who 70
Scolded
years ago
her.
hurt her
Right.
feelings. And I said, well, I'm sorry to be Captain Obvious here. He committed a sin that was sinful, that was wrong. And he shouldn't have done that. But then again, you commit apostasy. You left the church for 30 years and you're still holding on to his sin and telling that story in your 80s. When are you going to let yourself get free of telling that story? So the more you tell the story, the more it brings those memories back in. And again, what the demon has access to is the imagination. In the imagination is all of our past experiences, good, bad, and different. Yours are different than mine. So he has access to that. That's the data set that the enemy has access to, and part of the middle faculties. And so the more we retell these stories outside of a clinical setting, let me caveat it. Now, if you're in a clinical setting, then you're working through that in a professional way, hopefully in a way that you need to tell the story less and less, right? But in terms of just when people say, I just need to vent, I always say, well, no, you don't, because you don't need to vent, right? You don't need to vent because the demon is attracted to that high emotionality. It's something that draws him to you, this high emotionality. It says, I'm wounded. I'm wounded.
And you're giving access to the wound to the demon. Like, oh, here's a
Yeah,
soft
in
spot.
particular, the same demon that caused the wounds is right. You're inviting him, in a sense, bringing him right back in there to keep working and hiding beneath it. It's kind of like in many parts of the country, in the Southwest in particular, where there's ranching, in Texas and other places, there's ranching. The coyotes will decimate the livestock population. And and so it's legal to hunt coyotes because they're high level predators, as well as the big game population, livestock population. They'll wait until a cow is giving birth before they'll attack and kill the mother and the calves. And so what the ranchers will do is they'll call in the coyotes with a decoy call. And you can download them in the App Store, and it's Coyote Calling, and it's the sound of a dying rabbit, a wounded puppy, really sad sounds. When I'm speaking at a conference, I'll play that sounds, and all the women in the crowd always go, "Oh," because it's a sad sound, the sound of a dying rabbit or a wounded puppy, But this sound of a wounded prey draws in the predator, and so the coyotes will actually run into the camp where the hunters are. They'll rush into the camp out of this bloodthirst at the sound of a wounded dying rabbit or of a wounded puppy or a hurt chicken, their prey. And so when someone says, someone once told me, I was so worried, all I did was pray. And I said, well, really, you didn't, because those two things cannot occupy
Can't
the same
coexist,
space.
right?
You have to do one or the other, and you have to purify, because when you're praying from a position of worry or shame, yeah, God hears those prayers. Don't get me wrong, He hears those prayers, but it projects into the cosmos the sound of a dying rabbit, in a sense. So, or when I was a pilot, really at the transition time between GPS and these other modern technologies, we would pop smoke. The guys on the ground would say, we need close air support and extraction. And they would pop a hand grenade or smoke grenade of purple smoke, yellow
Right.
smoke.
So you could see where they were.
We see where they were. We would say, okay, this is a Cobra 1, 2, 3. We're coming in on your position. We're about 500 meters out. Pop yellow smoke. Boom. The commander on the ground will pop a smoke grenade. Yellow smoke permeates a certain area where they're at. So we see them, and we know where they're at. But so do the bad guys. Everywhere around them, they see that smoke being popped. So we want to keep a low signature emotionally as much as possible, provide as little as possible for the enemy to grab onto. Because what we're doing, we're praying out of shame, out of anger, out of hurt, outside of working in a clinical setting. Okay, you're working with your priest, you're working with your counselor. You're projecting into the cosmos, you're popping yellow smoke, you're projecting the sound of the dying rabbit. You have to just be very careful of that, because that woundedness is what attracts the demon.
So then what I'm hearing is my standards group, it's okay because even though I'm not technically clinical, I've trained my team so that, people come in, let me spouse in the, and we're like, okay, here's what you got to do. And just kind of pull them out of that into the holy space. And then when you're talking to a client, it's like, tell it to me, but then you're redirecting right away. And so if you're same with that Rachel's Vineyard, right? It's so let it out because it's been inside of you like a poison. And that's the biggest part. I think that's what I wanted to really get to my guests was sometimes we've got to let that poison out. So venting is one thing, but if you're like swallowing it and you keep it in and keep it in, it just keeps percolating. So the way of getting it out.
But as you know, wounds are either open or closed. People that come to you, people that go for mental health care. Some people are very open. They'll tell you absolutely everything. Other people, they're just not going to be open about it. So whether it's open in voice or whether it's held inside, it must be dealt with. And venting is not sufficient. It has to be dealt with. It has to be somehow integrated. We talk about moving a spectrum from pain to suffering and suffering to sorrow. And so when we suffer without any meaning whatsoever, it's just pain. And so when we're talking about projecting into the cosmos the sound of a dying rabbit, that's the soul that's in pain. They don't know what to do with that pain. They don't know how to. So it just emits forth from them. And so the movement begins to the interior self. The first movement is a movement of the intellect to say, I will now unite my suffering. I will take my pain and I will unite my suffering with the sufferings of Christ. And that movement, we move from pain into suffering, and now our suffering takes on meaning, right? And so our pain takes on meaning and we go into suffering. But there's still further to move from suffering into sorrow is a movement of the act of the will, which is a conforming of the will. So intellectually, I offer my suffering of what, in every Catholic home heard this phrase growing up, right? You
Offer it
get
up.
cut from the baseball team, the girls exclude you from the cool group, they get your boyfriend breaks up with you, and they say what? Offer it up, right?
Hmm.
And so offering it up is moving out of pain into suffering. But then the difference between just offering it up, but uniting the will in conformity to the will of God with Christ suffering, that now becomes redemptive. In that act, in that movement, we now move into sorrow. And in our sorrow, there's still pain, there's still suffering, but there's also joy because we've completely conformed ourselves. And so it's a continuum. It's not something that you're going to happen overnight. And so, one of the things that we recommend is, for example, when you take like your standards and you have someone who is in deep pain, what do we do with that pain? How do we take that pain and make it and have somewhere to put it? Suffering, suffering is like it's there's spiritual power in suffering. St. Paul says, I rejoice in my suffering. And in my body, I make up what's lacking in the suffering of Christ's body, which is the church. Well, how could something be lacking in the suffering of Christ's body, the church, if Christ from the cross said, it is finished, right? He also
Right.
says in Philippians, I think it's 129, to you has been committed not only to believe, but to suffer for the name. The glories that await us are nothing. The momentary light afflictions are nothing compared to the weight of glory that awaits us. But the transition through suffering is just part of the Christian faith. That's part of who we are as Christians, conform to the crucified one. And so Christ leaves open his side. Christ himself objectively acquires the graces of salvation, but it's through us. It's through our own suffering and union with him do graces to come to be distributed subjectively. So we differentiate between objective and subjective redemption. Now that's the theological explanation. And the practical thing is, okay, you've got this pain. There's somewhere in the I'm getting ready to do a conference at a parish on the last 24 hours in the life of Jesus. Each and all the symbolism and everything that's packed into there in the Gospels. But there's something mystical about the Triduum, the last 3 days leading up to Easter, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday. And so I encourage people that we're working with, because everybody that we're working with has trauma,
Hmm.
right? Has some traumatic event. And so take that trauma and find somewhere on Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and link it there, right? With an act of the will. Lord, this happened to me. You were rejected, and now I am rejected by my spouse has rejected me, but your spouse Israel rejected you. You see what I mean? It's
Yeah.
making the act of the will. It was Ash Wednesday several years ago. Um, when you're a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy that does a lot of running. I was an athlete. I was a runner. I was a boxer. I was in the army. You're exposed to cancer. So I went to a dermatologist, and I don't know if you ever seen, they do this procedure where they basically they
Oh, you
put
told me where like
they,
messed your face up,
they
and then
just
that
put
nun
cream on
said
my
to you,
face. Yeah, and it just and then afterwards they highlight everything that's precancerous, and then he goes back with liquid nitrogen and fries it. So I look like Quasimodo. I looked like the Crypt Keeper. It was horrible. I was planning on, in my vanity, I'm going to work from home for a few days. I'm not going to go outside. I don't want to be seen. But I had to drop something off at the Carmelite monastery, and so the sister that received me said, and she said, what happened to your face? And uh and,
so
and I was
so
like, hey,
calm
come on,
and
sister, give me a break. And I said, well, I
wait,
had
wait,
this.
wait. I gotta ask you, could you tell me the story before? Did she know you, or was she so
Yeah,
blunt
yeah,
as
yeah, she knew me. So she was like, what
okay,
happened to
well
your
at
face?
least
Yeah. And I said, but she didn't know me that well. And I said, I had this procedure, liquid nitrogen is those things. She said, it's beautiful because now as you go through Lent, every time you look in the mirror and you see how horrible you look, you can remember when they spit on the face of Jesus and how that much of
Mm,
burned against his holiness and how that hurt him to be rejected. And for all those times that you rejected God and spit in his face with your past and your sins, you now can offer that up in union with those who spit in Jesus's face.
I
Now that's
just
deep
did.
spirituality.
Yes.
That's
Yeah, I
deep.
just did that
But
with a person who commented. My husband left me. He turned the family against me. First he was abusive, then he divorced me, took all our property. I have no house, blah, blah, blah. And you really just talked about it. And that's kind of the direction I took it. It was like,
it
what
is.
an honor
Jesus
that you get to
was
be
stripped of
persecuted.
everything. He was stripped of everything. You know, we clean it up. I could show you if you want to see what it really looked like. If you got, you want to see something
Yeah, I
cool?
do actually.
Okay, hold on.
Like waiting for Dr. Dan. I'm sure it's going to be something.
I know this is not standard for podcast, but I wanted
That's
to show you.
okay.
Can you see it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is just a standard crucifix that one of the Carmelite sisters, I asked her to just to make it realistic, you know? And so they just put in a prayerful, contemplative way, put all the blood that would be there. And I was picking it up a few weeks ago, which by the way, in exorcism sessions, to show that to a possessed person, to the demon, when they see that, they just go ballistic to see the blood of Christ. It's the blood of Christ that conquers, right? But the Mother Superior said, "Oh, here it is. Thank you for, thank you for that." And no, thank the sisters. And she hands it to me. She said, that's not realistic.
With that
And I said,
cross?
really? Yeah, cross. She said, that's not realistic at all. She
Because
said
he was naked,
it would have
right?
been a lot worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been a lot bloodier, she said. Now that's somebody who's meditated on the life and death of Christ, you know. So linking somewhere to Christ and his suffering. Now that act by the God man, right? What Saint Irenaeus said in the 2nd century, what God did not assume, he did not redeem. In assuming our humanity, he now redeemed it, and now our suffering, united with his suffering, becomes redemptive. And so if you're just going to vent, it's going to keep picking that wound. How many times when your kids had a scab and you tell them, look, it's not going
Stop
to heal,
picking that
keep picking it.
scab. Yeah.
Stop picking it, right? We all
Not going to
know that.
heal.
It's not going to heal. So the only way it's going to be healed is when we unite our suffering to the one whose wounds, by his stripes, we are healed. And so we will be healed of that. And we move out of the subjectiveness of trauma and into the objective reality, right, of violence. Christ suffered violence, but he suffered no trauma, because trauma is something that's subjective, our subjective response to it. And so now we can move our subjective response to trauma and link it to the objective, world cosmos changing, salvific act of Jesus Christ. That movement is where we find healing of memories. Because now every time that, because up until now, the demon just uses your wounds and your emotion, because he hears you. He hears you venting, he watches your reactions, he knows the roll of the eyes, he knows what hurts you. He's an apex predator. So he knows what's going to trigger you. And so by every time you get that projection, you offer your suffering up, perhaps even for the person that hurts you. That's hard. But when
Yeah.
you're moving that, you're linking it with Christ's suffering, you're now into objective reality. And the demon does not want you to stay in the objective. He wants to keep you constantly in the subjective.
So just to make this very simple, pain, and you got to correct me. Pain is something you do. It's like by yourself. It's internalized. It's non-productive, but
Well,
suffering
pain
is,
is pain is a natural human response to injury.
which is
You know,
good because it shows you there's a problem.
it isn't just a lot of people, their living wounds are self-inflicted. Other people, somebody did something very cruel to them, but they suffered pain, and they stay in that pain until they move it increasingly to the objective suffering of Christ.
So these
And
mothers who watch their kids who are, addicted to drugs and they're killing themselves and stuff. So that's pain, even though it's nothing that they're doing. The child's doing it to himself, but of course the mother feels the child's pain. So then that suffering is when, Lord, I surrender my child to you. I just really need to break this thing down because I
yeah,
want to be so clear.
the two different people are suffering here, the child and the parent.
Mhm.
So, but if the parent continues only to dwell on how this child is causing me pain, there's no redemptive value to their suffering, if that makes sense.
But if she says, you know what, Lord, I surrender my child to you. He's yours. I'm going to live my life and do all I can to help him. But I'm not going to, that's the part I'm like, I'm not going to make this my cross, but it is kind of her cross,
It is your
right?
cross, but here's the thing: you have to change the perception because, and sometimes it means going back to and having in your mind a stock image of of the child when he was last in right relationship with God. You might have to go back to his first communion. You might have to go back to when he was a child. You might have to go back to the day of if it's your spouse, the day of your marriage. But let's go back to the child, the child that's addicted. You might have to, but what'll happen is when your phone rings and you see the caller ID or you see something on TV that reminds you of the child, the demon's going to project images of him doing very unholy things, images of him shooting up drugs, getting another tattoo, living in some kind of drug house. So the demon's just going to start projecting. And so because this is how the angels communicate, they communicate through projection or illumination is what St. Thomas says, but it's a projection of images. And so you have to learn how to battle back. So hold that stock image, make it your screensaver on your telephone, your caller ID,
Yeah. The little
on
smiling
your
boy in his fifth grade picture.
exactly,
Whatever.
exactly. Him standing and when he made his first communion, the smiling boy in the fifth grade picture, that image you're projecting, the demon will project to you that image of your son falling into this immoral lifestyle, which drives you to more shame, drives you to more fear, drives you to anger. Instead, you project back. You project back into the cosmos. This is a child of God.
Made in the
This
image and
child
likeness
bears
of
the
God,
mark of
love.
Christ. What's that?
Yes, so you're saying to yourself, this is made in the image and likeness of God. He is beloved of the Lord, and you just say all those good things.
You're projecting back that image because the more because oftentimes, because what the demon can work on and what he works specifically at is distorting our images. Because what happens according to the faculties of St. Thomas, you've got your highest faculties are the intellect and the will. And when rightly ordered, the intellect guides the will. The intellect makes sound judgment, guides the will. The will is obedient to the intellect and directs the lower faculties. C.S. Lewis put it this way: the head rules the belly through the chest. So the intellect guides the will, the chest, the heart, to guard the lower faculties. Now, the lower faculties, this is a simplistic explanation of St. Thomas's what's called Thomistic psychology. The lower faculties are the instincts and the passions. This is why, as Catholics, we go into Lent to make small little mortifications so that those instincts and passions don't begin to rule us. Because what the diabolic is constantly trying to invert them, right?
Right.
To let the instincts and the passions or desires drive things. Those things we have to continue to mortify as we live in this flesh. As St. Paul says, "Who will deliver me from this body of flesh?" Right? The things that I want to do, I don't do. What I don't do, I do. Who will deliver me? Praise be Jesus. Praise be God, the Father through Jesus Christ. And so we have to order the lower faculties through an act of the will, but the intermediate faculties are the memories and the emotions. This is where the battle takes place. And so before we begin to and take on a human thought of intellection, we have things embedded into the mind or the imagination, which is the data set that comes with your life. You'll never have memories of a battlefield and tanks and soldiers and gunfire or fighting in a ring. I'm not going to have the memories that you have.
Of life,
Those
giving
things are
birth and things like that.
giving
Right.
birth or other experiences, good, bad, and indifferent. They're all different. But the enemy, the demon, has access to that data set in your imagination and in mine. So the more that, and so and it's the pre-intellection or the imagination that helps, that is tied to the memory and the emotions. This is where the battle takes place, because if he can trigger you, if you were abused let's say you're talking about your standards, and your ex-husband was an abuser. He had a Fu Manchu mustache, and he drove a green truck and always wore a flannel shirt. All the demons got to do is cycle somebody with 2 or 3 of those features into your life at a low moment and trigger you into a shame or anger response, or lead you to some self-destructive behavior. You know, if you've ever had an older brother or older sister, you know what that looks like. They hold you down and they take your fist and they make
Say
you punch
uncle.
yourself with it.
Yes.
Yeah, why do you keep hurting yourself? Stop hitting yourself. Stop, leave me alone. Why do you keep punching yourself? So the demon really doesn't care if you hit yourself with booze, with sexual promiscuity, with withdrawal from the world and isolationism. You know, he wants to draw you away from human relationships where healing takes place. He wants to draw you away from Christ and keep you grounded in
And into
shame.
sin.
And so it's the
Yeah.
imagination. You know, I'll do an exercise when I speak at groups on this. You know, you're old enough, even though you don't look old enough. We've talked about we're similar age. How do you put a car? I know you're old enough to know how to put a car in reverse, right?
Right.
How to put how do you put a 4-speed or a 5-speed car in reverse, a manual transmission?
You gotta push the brake, then the clutch, then you grab
Right.
the
Exactly. All right. How do you turn the hot water on your shower?
turn the faucet and then
Yeah. So sometimes it's like this. Some
right.
people it's like this. But every single time that I give that exercise, you have to grab this invisible stick and push your left foot into the clutch and use
Mm-hmm.
your body to recall the memory.
I actually was there. I was pushing my feet when I said that.
Yeah, exactly. Because your body remembers. Your body remembers, right? It's the memory and the emotions that are together. And so if you do and you take your standards groups or other groups and say, okay, close your eyes and go to the most deep, intense memory you can, good or bad, right? And usually it's a bad memory, right? Someone goes back to childhood abuse, or the day their spouse left them, or the day that they were physically beaten, um, whatever.
The day they had that abortion, the
The day they
day,
had the abortion,
yeah.
you insert yours because it's part of the human condition. And now try to separate the memory from the emotion. And that's very difficult. That's very difficult because you go to that memory, and in recalling that memory, you're flush with the emotion of shame, of fear, of anger. Why wasn't my father present? Why didn't he protect me? How did God let this happen to me? You know, so separating the emotion from the memory is key, and that is through an act of the will, and it's through through this linking through the words and deeds of life of Christ. A good place to start is right there in the Triduum. But Jesus did this himself. If you really are the Messiah, the devil said, throw yourself off this pier. It is written, you know, I will protect you with your angels and guide you in all your ways, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Jesus, so he projects scripture to Jesus. Jesus projects back. It is not right to put the Lord thy God to the test. Right. So Jesus projects
He
back with
replaces the image that Satan was trying to sell
the
him with the
distorted
one.
image with the truth, with the truth. And that just takes an interior discipline. And so the reason we discourage telling the story is you're embedding that emotion and that memory deeper into your interior life, and you're making it harder to
Okay, so when
purify.
the people call, okay, so like, so I'll just compare like me with someone else because I'm a spiritual director, right? So a friend, and I think of one friend that calls me all the time, because she's about, 15 years younger than me, 17. Anyway, and she's like, I just know that I'm in this place where I'm feeling angry or and then she'll tell me the situation. And she's like, tell me what I know I need to hear. So she's explaining what happened, and which often will involve another person. So this person hurt me. She did this, she did that. Here's where I am.
Yeah.
And then I am like, yeah, and here's what God's probably, and so let's focus on this. And, it's testing your this. So the humility is maybe going to get strengthened, stuff like that. So when it's coming out like that, is that bad? Or like the other person that came to me and said, my son's going to go to hell. He's living this lifestyle.
Well,
And she knows that I'm a spiritual director and she doesn't tell anybody. She just tells me. So
Well,
kind,
when you know, again, telling the story is going to keep embedding it.
but it was the first time she was telling it, for instance.
Yeah,
So,
that's okay. I mean, I understand that there's a time
well,
for
but we
holy
want to understand
friendships.
this.
Yeah, yeah,
I
there's
need
a
to
time for
understand
holy
this.
friendships, but the premise is if you continue to tell the story, you're going to keep that memory fresh. In fact,
Okay.
it's not even
So
keeping the
getting it
memory
out,
fresh.
Dan, right? I just want to make sure before you go, it's like, it's okay to get it out and say, oh my gosh, this is the pain I just experienced. Of course, telling it to say the right person, right?
But at the same time,
As long as you're
know
not,
what the know what the sin of detraction is.
right,
You know, the sin of detraction is telling the faults of another person, and they're true. You
right.
know, a good examination of conscience is the I think it's 4475 to 89 of the Catechism. Offenses against the truth, detraction, libel, gossip, slander, rash judgment. All these things they're offensive against the truth. So unless you're doing this in a clinical setting, the person that you're saying hurt you isn't there to defend themselves. So you have to just be careful because there's a fine line between working through this in a professional clinical way and also falling into the sin of detraction. And that's just there's a fine line. So the confessional counseling,
Okay.
but always bringing it back to Christ. And I'm not talking about, hey, I got to tell you about my friends. Then those people from church, I saw them coming out of the chapel. I mean,
I'm
the
saying
marriage,
this, they're good so you can
but
pray
pray
for
for them.
them. Yeah,
Pray for them.
yeah.
I can tell you working in extreme cases, okay, of possession, that there's several sins that constantly pop up in cases of a diabolical affliction. One of them is the sins of the speech, detraction. That seems to be a very common one. And also another one is unforgiveness. A very powerful emotion and sin is unforgiveness. And so what do we do with that? The hurt is, the really detraction and unforgiveness are really an interior or exterior and interior reflections,
Of the
of the
same
same
thing.
reality.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. In many ways, in many ways. So it's just a fine line, and it's got to be something that's got to be done in a way that doesn't fall into that and into other sins
Yeah,
or
after
just
talking to you, I didn't realize that I was so guilty. I ran to confession like within a day or two of talking to you. I did not realize I was guilty of detraction. So I was sharing things like, oh my gosh, you know what, let me just say, okay, well, so like say my spouse, right? So, oh, my spouse, well, but thinking it's my marriage, I'm allowed to, but realizing, whoa, wait, because you're like, does it make people think less of this person for, I was like, I didn't even mean
yeah.
that. I didn't, and I was like, whoa, I can't do that. I've done that a lot, with
Yeah, what's
him
the
or others or
who was it? I don't know if it was the Curé de Ars or Saint Francis de Sales. Someone confessed to him the sin of detraction and gossip, which are two different things, but they're similar. And he said, for your penance, I want you to take a pillow. And I'm not talking about my pillow, okay? I'm talking about an old goose down pillow
Mhm.
and shake it out into the city square
And then go pick up all the
and then
feathers.
go pick up all the feathers. Yeah. So it's impossible, you can't, it's hard to put the feathers back. That was the whole point of the penance given. So it's a very difficult thing, but it's something, what we've seen is the devil looks for the mouth that blesses and curses. So what is again, I'm a Cap Scout. What is the enemy looking for? He's looking for pattern breaks. He's looking for inconsistencies. When he looks at he's a predator. So look at the Discovery Channel and the wildebeest pack of them, and the lion by himself. Now that lion could take out the biggest, strongest wildebeest out there. Now the wildebeest what they'll try to do is circle around him, turn their backs and just try to kick him and ram him and kick and and just try. And maybe with 20 of them kicking and ramming, they might be able to take him down. But by themselves, not one could beat the lion. But he doesn't go after the main one because there's a slight risk, a very slight risk, but there's still a slight risk. He goes after the one that's lame, that's limping, that's separated from the group. The one that's signaling, I have vulnerabilities. Maybe he's wounded, maybe he's limping, you know. And then so if we know the enemy of man to be the apex supreme predator, he's going to be looking for those same weaknesses, vulnerabilities in us. And this projection of high emotionality is one of the things that he looks for.
So what are people going to do then? All right, so we've kind of determined that. I'm thinking, of course, based on my own life and the people I talk to, right? So you've got this person who's been abused, who's been, hit and hurt, or someone who's been sexually assaulted, or they're bloodied, they're bruised, physically, metaphorically, emotionally. So kind of give us the process of, I just literally, I think of a young lady when my daughter went to college that got raped. Guy broke into her place, right?
Mm.
She was a virgin, raped her at knife point. Horrifying. Okay, so what's the process? So she doesn't want to talk about them, but she's got to get through this. So of course you have to tell the cops. We'll get past that. You got to tell the cops what happened. Then what? Who else can you tell? How do you tell? What don't you say? How would you work
Well,
in a
of course, you
perfect
have
world? How would you work through that?
you have to work through with good mental health care, and that is a clinical setting. Working through a spiritual director or a counsel, and a mental health professional, and the sacrament of confession. These are areas that woundedness this
Heal.
is the right milieu for that to be discussed. But just telling everybody constantly
But
what
the wound
happened.
was against her, right?
Right.
So her roommates, should she tell them? Should she not? Or, maybe tell them once, but then move on. Or, you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of people watching this show that have wounds of different kinds.
Sure. Yeah, and there's a lot of people that have suffered wounds that could say, these are the lessons that you can learn. In my experience, this is what could help you prevent this from happening to you. For example, that's different than, here's my emotions, you know.
So if you can kind of take the situation, separate it from the emotionality, which if I'm understanding, so I think I am, Satan grabs onto that emotionality.
Yes,
That's
he's
what we're
attracted to it.
avoiding.
He grabs onto it. He rides it like a wave. And sometimes he can just use that emotionality. Now he can start manipulating. Because what the enemy does is he tries, according to St. Thomas, he tries to habituate by by subtle manipulation of our emotions. He begins to try to habituate our responses. It's almost like, when you got your dog and you say, hey, watch this, and they've all got that sweet spot, they lay on their back and you hit a certain
Yeah.
spot, and then that
Tickle
leg will
their
start
tummy
kicking.
and yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The enemy wants to do that to us. Hey, watch this. I can make him insult his wife.
This
I
is
can
so,
make
oh my gosh, this is so huge. So when I teach anger management, right? One of the things we do is we try to, so anger is a secondary emotion. It comes out when there's a primary emotion that you are uncomfortable with or can't name, or just, it just hurts. Like most men, and you'd get this because I taught it in the military. The first emotion men say is, I'm not, can you fill in the blank?
I'm
Weak.
not angry.
I'm not weak. I'm
Oh,
not
yeah.
weak.
I could have
Weak.
put
I
about
heard
30 things in there. Yeah, yeah.
but years of doing this, that is the number one thing I hear these, I'm not weak. And so they always had to fight against this weakness. But helping them to go, okay, you feel this emotion. So why did you, when that person cut you off on the road, why did you follow them down, you know, whip them the bird, get profane, or in worst cases, ram their bumper, which I had those guys in my class too. Or one guy said I actually got out and shot at them. I was like, you're driving right here in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Be careful, people watching this show, the things you do on the road, because those people are there. So we go to the emotions and
Yeah, I had a guy road rage on me this week. Yeah, it was bizarre. I was just like,
right. And you're trying to figure out what is the emotion? What did they feel? And often it's like, don't disrespect me. You don't belittle me. No one. So they have to name this emotion. And so what I go through and I teach this in the segment is, okay, what did you do when this guy cut you off and he did this, this, and this? And then 30 people, I'll make sure I'll ask each one of them in the class, what did you do? How did you respond? This person says, I flipped him the bird back. And the next person says, I just turned up my radio, did nothing. And the next person says, I chased him down with my car, and so on and so forth. And I said, so what caused you to do that? And they said, the guy who cut me off on the road. I said, no, he didn't. Because if the guy cutting you off caused your reaction, then all 30 of you would have reacted the same way. What cut you off wasn't the action, but your beliefs about the action. And that's where you're getting into our intellect, right? So if you believe about that guy cutting you off as that idiot is trying to make me look bad, then your consequences, your consequent actions, responses are going to reflect those beliefs. If you're thinking, guy's not worth my effort, he's probably late for work, then your consequences are I'm in peace listening to my radio and it's not going to bother me. So I talk about take that now and apply that, Dan, to a situation at home, right? And your marriage, your partner just always riles you up, or your dad or your parent just always said hurtful, harmful things. And then every time they say or do those things, they trigger you, you're like, and you lash out. And so again, they separate that middle part, your beliefs, and just that's what they did. Thus, this is what I did. And I always have to bring it back to, we call it the ABC theory of emotional arousal. It's Albert Ellis's. Activating event is A, beliefs about the event is B, and C is your consequences. So if you want to change the consequences, you got to change your beliefs. So we'll do this thing about, okay, your little puppet. Okay, dance, Dan. Watch me make Dan Schneider dance. And I'm going to say
Right.
this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that. And every time they do, you're like, ah. And I said, what your job is to cut these strings, right? You just cut these strings. So they're like, watch what I can do to Dan. And all of a sudden, time and working on it, they say or do those same nasty things. They make those comments. They do it. And you just go about doing whatever you normally did. And then the other person's like, I can't make Dan dance anymore. And so that's kind of, I think we're in the same perspective here, is you're surrendering your thoughts either over to the enemy, but look what you're doing to me, or going, in our case, I give it to God. You're with
It's
God. This
yeah.
is
That's the lie is it's weakness, and that flows as an emotion from a place of shame and woundedness.
Mhm.
So that's where you have to catch it. You have to catch it because you have to look at its source, because we're over here focusing on the physical, the carnal, right? The anger outburst or whatever. But you've got to slow it down. I remember when I first started working with cases, I started getting blasted, you know. You get really close, to the enemy. It's not like a little weekend seminar. You're week in and week out grinding it out. You're helping people. You're assisting at exorcisms, etc. And so I was getting battered, and so I remember going to my guardian angel. I'm like, hey, help me, I appreciate you putting ice in my face and help me get the swelling down between rounds, but slow the punches down. He yelled back at me, he's like, hey, you got to ask me, what I mean? Just don't be so stupid,
Your
but
guardian
slow the
angel said
punches.
that?
Basically, we talk like that. So
Like Cab Brothers, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. He's a big brother that I didn't want to mess with. But I asked him, like when I watch boxing, my wife marvels because I can go before the fight even starts. I don't even know the fighters. I'll say, yeah, I think the guy in the blue trunks is probably going to win. She's like, how do you know? Like, I don't know. You can tell by the way he moves. He's got a good sweat going, like a certain, you can just kind of tell. And within 2 or 3 rounds, you can kind of get a really good feel.
Yeah.
So it's how do you, uh, um, I don't know why I brought that up, my boxing analogy.
Well, I don't know. We'll keep it going because we're talking
But
about
it's a good
the
analogy.
primary
Yeah,
emotion, and you
yeah,
said you had to
yeah.
take it a step further because
So,
it's
so,
not
but
just the weakness.
but yeah, exactly. So boxing, football, there's regulated aggression is needed. There's a need for regulated aggression. Aggression and anger is part of who we are. But we're over here looking at the symptoms, the physical things, but the
Got to
habituation
look at the
is over
cause.
here, the
What's
psychological.
pulling? Right.
Right, what's
What's
pulling the
pulling?
strings? And so
Hmm.
we're over here focusing on the external, but something on the internal. It's like whack-a-mole. You remember that game whack-a-mole?
Oh
And you put the
yeah. Oh
little,
yeah.
yeah, it's like whack-a-mole. You start whacking, sexual impurity, and you get that under control, and boom, here comes anger. Once you get your sexual life ordered, you start getting anger or judgmentalism, and all these other things start whacking on that, and then this pops back out. So it's a constant battle until you
Yeah.
get to the root causes of the not just the physical but the
Exactly.
spiritual defect. And so here's what we say, and I quoted, I forget who the counselor, the psychologist was, but it's a modern psychologist, and he coined a phrase, and you know this phrase: if you can name it, you can tame it. And so naming the emotion, he's talking about the emotions. Now, I'd use that by analogy to talk also about the spiritual, because behind the emotions and the moral and the defects in virtue, you're going to have an attraction, a psychological compatibility with the demon that's going to be continually working and grinding at that weak spot of yours. He's going to continually work that, if you can name it, you can tame it. You got to get this under control in the emotional realm, but the same thing, you can begin to militate against the defect and against the evil spirit that might be afflicting you. When it comes
Yeah.
to the triggers, the demon knows them. Why is it that we're always like this when it comes to the holiday season? Because there's always that one person in the family that pushes your buttons. Well, what's the best way to keep somebody from pushing your buttons?
Don't
Is
go
to
near
have
the
no
person.
buttons. Have
Yeah,
no
yeah,
buttons.
right,
At
right,
first, it might be stay away from the guy that pushes
right.
your button, but over time, and what does that mean? It comes down to meekness. Come to me, for my burden is easy. What does it say? My yoke is light, my burden easy.
My bird is
I
easy,
am
my
meek and humble of heart. Moses said in Exodus, and Moses was the meekest man on the face of the earth. If you don't say so yourself, Moses, you're the meekest man on the face of the earth. What does that word mean? It means power under control.
just did a video on it yesterday. It should be
There
coming
you
out like
go.
today or tomorrow. Because when I first understood that, like really got it, it was like meekness is the most strength there is, because it's this internal self-control and strength. When Jesus was being condemned by Pontius and they're calling him names and stuff, and he didn't say anything, like, why aren't you defending yourself? That took strength.
Yeah.
He's like,
It-
why should I say
my
something?
kingdom's not of this earth. If I wanted to, you don't think my attendants would come out here
Right,
and
but we
beat
look
you
at
guys out?
meekness, and I think Satan tried to do it like this timid little passive. It's okay if you beat on me. Oh, heck no. Jesus
There's
was
such thing.
meek, was the strongest thing there was.
Yeah, yeah. So Moses was meek because by his command and through him, God parts the waters. He
Right.
destroyed an entire army of Egypt and Pharaoh by his command. By his command, the water, 10 plagues happened, right? That's power under control. This is a word also used like the bridle of a horse, that the bride that the horse has meekness. He has power. If you ever had horses, they are the most powerful, beautiful, and powerful creatures. If you get on a horse's back, I had a horse for a while, and not long, a few years ago, I was going on a horseback ride with a monk, and they've got horses there, and one of the monks took off on a full dead run. This guy knew how to do horses. I'm a trail rider. I'm not like a cowboy. So my horse takes off on a dead run,
You must have
scared the
wet
daylights out. Yeah,
yourself.
yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
I was
God.
like, all right, here we go. Yeah. So, but that's power, but not under control. But it was not his fault. It was my fault. I wasn't given the right commands. But when you see someone that can control a horse, somebody who's into, whether it's English or Western style of horsemanship, they take the most powerful of creature and they guide it. And that horse is docile, right? That horse is meek. Because if that horse wanted to, it could take that person and just take off running and run till the person flops off. It could throw him off. It could do all sorts of things. These are powerful creatures, but they're under control. That's what meekness is. So it isn't weakness. When the guy says, well, I'm
Right.
not weak. No, you're not meek, right? If you want to see a true strength, a true man, look at the virtues of Saint Joseph, right? God entrusted his greatest creature, the Virgin Mary, but then his son to this one guy. So that's power. That's
Yeah,
meekness. That's
weakness or
that's that's
meekness is
virtue.
weakness turned inside out, is what I heard someone said. So it's
Yeah,
like the
that's that's
total
that's a
strength.
clever phrase. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, okay, I guess if we can kind of sum up this conversation, because I mean, you've given a lot of really, really rich stuff. And correct me then. So it's not a problem to talk, but you've got to talk in the controlled environment where you know that it's here for the purpose of healing, a counselor, a church, a confessional. You shouldn't repeat it too often or to the wrong people. You shouldn't surrender the heart or to the intellect to the heart, right? It shouldn't.
Or to the belly, to the
Yeah.
lower emotions, the instincts and the passions.
So
Yeah.
it's okay to share, like when something initially happens. Oh my gosh, I just found my daughter's in a same-sex relationship, right? So perhaps verbalizing it to someone, and then that person can push you to the right
Yeah.
help. So that's not a sin, right?
Right. There's one of the Psalms that comes up in the Office of Readings that said, "Who will see the face of God?" Right? He who closes his eyes, lest he look upon evil; that he close his ears, lest he hear. How does he say it? Lest he listen to violence. You know. So it's the guarding of the senses. I remember one time we had a Benedictine monk staying with us for a few days, and my wife said something like, "Oh, did you hear what happened to this couple?" And and it had nothing to do with anything sinful, but as soon as the sentence started, the monk went, no, 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 no. He was trying to block his hearing to hear any detraction. This is how the monks live, that they live a life of such purity that even listening to that is dangerous to their own soul because of the imagination. Now they're getting the imagery put into their head as well. So catching that and knowing the right context for this, but teasing out the emotionality, the anger, the regulated use of the faculty of anger is important, right? For defense, for athletes, for boxers and football players, but it's the unregulated use of the emotions. And so when you're working in a clinical setting, of course, you're working through it in a methodical way, moving towards healing. But when you're just sharing it, it very quickly falls into detraction or other sins. St. Thomas says it this way, that um, opinion kills counsel. So when it's just opinion, then it's going to stop any counsel that might be present. You see what I mean? And so when it's in a
Yes,
counsel
yes.
setting, so for me, it was learning quickly to stop using the phrase, I think, well, I think this, or I believe this, or I feel. Those are to me were dangerous lead-ins. My experience is this. In my professional training, it's this. From my background, here's X. It's very clinical and analytical. Well, I think this. Well, he's just an idiot. Well, yeah, you got to hear what this guy did. Next thing you know, it just turns into a bloodbath, right? uh, you know,
Hmm.
carnage of detraction. And this is what I mean. The devil looks for the mouth that blesses and curses. We go to mass, we praise God, we receive the Lord in Holy Communion. We sing songs of praises, we recite the Psalms and other antiphons. Then we walk out and say, that was the worst hymn I've ever seen. Do you see what she was wearing? See how fat that guy's gotten? You believe she received communion? You know what a hoe she is, right? That's the type of guy. That's another pattern break. That's an inconsistency that the devil looks for, right? The mouth that has the ability to bless and then the curse. So cleaning up the speech is a real key point for
And when
spirit.
in doubt, be silent.
We're moving into what you described earlier. The positive reactions. You're moving into really human maturity. You're growing in virtue, and it's hard because we have these deep embedded traumatic experiences that unless they're linked with that image right behind you, the Sacred Heart, the wounded heart of Christ, unless they're linked with that, they become something that can easily be manipulated. Now, that being said, grace builds on nature, St. Thomas says. Grace heals nature of the effects of sin and trauma. Grace it heals, elevates, right? Perfects and it elevates. So it perfects us so that we become more human than before. St. Irenaeus, second century, that the vision of God is man fully alive. And so us living fully alive in virtue is God's vision for us. The glory of God is the vision of man, or the glory of man is the vision of God. The glory of God is man fully alive, he said. And so us growing in virtue, living in a as perfect as we can in virtue and our human nature, but then elevate and then heals, perfects, but elevates to participate in divine life, to participate in the life of God. And so we have to work with the mental health side of things to give grace more to grab onto. And
Yeah.
so living a life as virtuously as possible, mortifying, putting to death, as St. Paul says, the former self, having good strategies and tactics. If you can name it, you can tame it. All these other things are good so that so that the grace has more to work with.
Right. I think of I've been working on that. So it was actually January 20th of 21 that I no longer watch TV. It was just so much vitriol. I don't go on a Facebook. I don't really go any social media. And people are like, you're always on there. I'm like, I pay someone to post that because I no longer can do it. But anyway, so I have found so much more peace. I don't watch any news. I mean, I'll pick some videos that I want to watch, but they're usually Father Ripperger or some Catholic talk and so on and so forth. But what you're saying then plays out to be true because I only want to fill my mind with things of God. And so I also notice how hypersensitive I've become. So I found out, I know you'll smile, that there is a almost 24 hours a day Little House on the Prairie. And I was like, oh my gosh, they talk about God on every show. There's no
Yeah.
smoking, no swearing, no sex scenes, thank God. And my poor husband, he's good. He's like, no, watch it. And I know it's not his favorite show, but he'll let me watch it. So Sunday, it was nasty and rainy and the Super Bowl wasn't on. We'll watch games. There's something to do. And I said, for your sake, let's try to find a real movie. And so again, our television's not on Monday through most any day. And so I put a movie on. It was about uh, Queen Elizabeth with two teenage daughters, like, okay, this is probably good anyway. And then all of a sudden this sex scene pops up. I'm not even going to say what happened because I don't want to put the images out there. But I'm like, what? And then the scene got worse. I'm like, so I'm like, forget this. And then I found another movie and there was a sex scene. And I was like, what? And these aren't movies that I expected to have sex scenes. And I'm like, what the heck? So I quick turned them off. I said, I'm going back to Little House on the Prairie. So it showed how I am getting more sensitive to it. Whereas 5-10 years ago, if you saw it, I'd be like, I don't want to see it, but it didn't strike me as powerfully as it did there because it immediately offended my senses. And then it just makes me sad for like my grandchildren or children or people that have to watch that. But this is part of what I'm hearing you're saying, just purify the senses, purify the mind. Don't let those images in. And
Yeah.
then it'll draw you closer to God, your
There was
vocation.
an instance in the after Vietnam in the 70s. There were some wealthy Texans who had their children got caught up into some cult out in California. And one of those Mooney type, California
Yeah,
70s apocalyptic cults, and
right.
so brainwashing and all that. And so they hired some former Green Berets to go in and extract them. And so they extracted them and pulled them out, and they bought these wealthy oil men bought a hotel on somewhere on Route 66 in Texas. And they took these young adults and they had to deprogram them. And I tell the story to show the extreme of what happens in extreme cases of brainwashing. And so what they did was they gave them something like 30 days of complete isolation, not even labels on their bottles or food or anything. They had to get complete isolation. And then they gave them the scriptures to read. And it took several months to deprogram and then reprogram by pulling a complete and total withdrawal, because the way that the occults work and some of these other bizarre groups they do it through bodily programming, through memory. And so they know that they can trigger an image, and in that image they can incite the emotion, and they can bring the person under some level of manipulation and manipulative control. And so we know this is how and the big picture, how these things are broken. So even on a small little level, just pulling back from movies, when you go back and you see them, withdraw from the imagery. I mean, from social media and movies, when you go back to it, it's like the frog in water. If you sit and watch these movies day in and day out, you're desensitized, which is not good. But what's even worse is those images are in your head. And anybody that
Right.
was addicted to pornography, it takes years to get those images out of their brains. So now you watch these movies, and now you see these images. You're going to have to work a little bit to get those out of your brain and out of your imagination. And so it's just not healthy to do that. It's just not worth it. Why waste what little space we have interiorly and what little time we have on this earth? Why waste it on these things? Little House on the Prairie. If you want to make your husband happy, watch Gunsmoke. It's a man version
Okay,
of
I
Little
could
House on
do
the
that.
Prairie.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Was it
so
Michael Landon in that one too, or no? That was the other
no,
one.
that was I
Yeah.
forget.
Yeah, where he
Yeah.
had his brothers and they were all country.
Yeah,
I'll go
Gunsmoke
look it up.
yeah,
I'll look it up.
Gunsmoke is Burt Reynolds was actually in a couple seasons. Sheriff Matt Dillon, it was the longest running TV show. But it's very wholesome. I'm not saying that we're not monks, we're not nuns. We
Right.
live in a
I have to
world,
live a life, right? And
but
you
you have
get
to live your life
lonely
and you
and
have to be free. And but at the same time, guard what goes into this
vessel.
wonderful thing that God has given us of the human brain and our faculties, and work on putting good stuff in. You remember back in the day when we learned computers back in the 80s, garbage in, garbage out, you know,
Mhm.
and it really works that way. You put good stuff in, you get good stuff out. You put garbage in, you get garbage out. How many, the obsession this week was with Taylor Swift,
Kelsey
and some of
and
her concerts are just straight satanic. And those audience hall, those tens of thousands of people there, of those, I would say 80% are probably baptized Christians. Garbage in,
yeah.
garbage out. And you wonder why these things desensitize us, but also pull us away from the call to vocation at an early age, the call that God's calling somebody at an early age to be a priest, to be a minister, to be a nun, whatever. But that's getting distracted by just immersing ourselves in this
By the
world, which is
Taylor Swift concert.
yeah, and it's becoming more and more evil. It's not
Right.
even neutral. We're not even talking about the 80s, which were neutral. What I mean? We're
Yeah, I
talking
just watched a
that
video
were neutral and
yesterday.
godless and slightly innuendo. Now
Yeah.
it's just
So
foul.
today, a video I saw was someone said, look at all these people at the Super Bowl that had this same satanic symbol tattooed like on their neck or something. She said it wasn't even hidden. She goes, do you think that's coincidence? That, oh,
No,
they
and
all
then
actually have to
another
have that
video.
same
Yeah,
demonic,
exactly.
and it was full and it's in your face. But you just
Yeah,
don't even know
because
it because you've
because
seen those symbols all over.
right. Because the demon always demands and always wants and strives for a platform. And so this is the largest platform, and this is the most largely watched event in the largest country of the world, broadcast all over the world. So he's always going to he's going to use that to broadcast so yeah, so it's not surprising at all. It's garbage. It's not worth watching.
I know. Well, the game was good. It was
Yeah.
a really good game. But anyway,
Yeah.
I won't say anything else. My team
Yeah.
wasn't there. But
Yeah. Yeah.
Dan, I know
Yeah.
we
Yeah. I mean, again, be human, but just be aware that
exactly. And
they're
that's what
there.
we were. It's like I was prepared for the halftime shows. Like, and last year I didn't even watch it and I'd seen clips. And this year I was like, oh, okay, they're not naked. They're not, whatever. I was trying to be observant. But anyway, we'll get off that one.
Yeah.
Because for the sake of time, you and I could keep talking forever and you always bring such richness. But we're going to sum it up, right? So with just giving, as always, my viewers marching orders, because you've already told us a lot of good things to do. But name one thing you'd have our viewers do differently as a result of something we talked about today.
I would say the best thing you could do to work on your interior stability is to establish a daily regimen of prayer. Jordan Peterson, he's a brilliant guy, and what does he say? It's one of his 12 steps or 12 actions of successful people. Make your bed, and it seems like a little thing. So I'm not saying make your bed and do Jordan Peterson things. What I'm saying is imposition of order in your life. And that goes through setting time aside to pray. We must set aside time to pray. And I mean, podcasts are great. That's not prayer. Reading about prayer is not prayer. Reading about the life of Teresa of Avila is not prayer. Prayer is prayer. Prayer is sitting down and spending time. What Teresa of Avila says, the conversation with him who dwells within us whom we know loves us, his majesty within. So spending time yeah, we do vocal prayers, I pray the rosary every day. But then to stop and read the scriptures slowly, meditate on scripture, on the words of Christ, the life of Christ, start immersing your interior faculties with images, not of sex scenes on crappy movies, but the words and deeds of our Savior. And that's what mental prayer is. It's there's no secret to it. It's sitting before the Lord, spending time and quiet before him. Even 15 minutes a day. I think I mentioned this last time. St. Catherine of Siena said that everybody should pray at least 30 minutes a day unless they're really busy, she said. And then they should pray for an hour, And that tells us something. This is the doctor of the church. And so that setting time aside to pray, and not just I did it once and I go about it, spending time throughout the day, making stops at the chapel to pray, pulling aside to read scripture during your lunch break, little acts of love to God throughout the day, ordering the life to prayer. And starting on Ash Wednesday now with Lent coming up, this is a good time to start reorienting and not just giving something up, but add something. If you're going to add something, add a prayer discipline. And in that, you begin to help reorder the interior faculties and wash out some of those old memories and purify those memories. And God will, from that point, take you down the deeper routes of true freedom, true healing.
Dr. Dan Schneider, you're an excellent guest, and I kind of snagged him. I get him close to every month now, so keep coming back to hear the great gifts that God has given to Dan. It's not Dan, it's the gifts God's given him. But I'm grateful that you bless my viewers with
Well, thanks for having
what
me.
God has given you.
We're all kind of in this together, so we just try to do what we can to help people through the rough times, and we all go through it. It's just it's part of the human condition. After the fall of Adam and Eve, there's going to be suffering, there's going to be problems. What do we do with that? How do we tap into all the wonderful graces that God has offered to us through the church?
Yeah.
Prayer, etc. Let's tap into that and try to become better people.
Amen. And to do that, you can go just in the show notes below. We have a link to Dr. Dan Schneider's weekly radio show. I still say radio, even though it's, podcast, whatever, with on Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Also his book, The Liber Christo Method, anything else he's doing right now. If you want to contact him, find that in the show notes below. And if you want to find me, go to breakfastwithbacon.com. Start signing up for the Rumble channels, my monthly newsletter, because we are finding that these shows are not being sent to you anymore. You have to look for them because the bad guys don't want you to find them. So look for Dan, look for me, look for all those that you respect, but go and fill yourselves with what you consider to be information that God would approve of. Of course, as Dan said, get your prayer time in first. So I think that's all we have right now. Dan, you know how to take us off the air because you're just an expert. I am
Yes.
Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and we both want to remind you to live your life
Sunny side up.
yes.
Right?